Yeah, and maybe to continue on this idea of the cyborg, the apparatus of murderous violence.
Yeah.
The United Kingdom and the United States are presently looking to increase their efforts on the plan of cyber war.
Yeah.
So they want to put a certain equilibrium between traditional warfare and also with digital warfare. So the question is, beside the language of the just war and stuff like that, how does liberalism technology becomes to couple in a certain way?
How does it change to, how does liberalism and technology come together?
Yeah.
Yeah, because technology is the story of liberalism. Okay, I mean, liberalism is the ruling ideology of the West for 500 years, certainly, in one incipient form or another. And we've reached the age of fully completed liberalism. Fully completed liberalism happens when the languages of religion and violence technologies of violence can effortlessly merge with one another, and in which you can have two things simultaneously. You can have what a writer for the journal we edit, C Theory, calls, and an article is coming up called God Talk. It says we're living in the coming age of pastoral management. We just want to do good. You can read the nauseous kind of nostrums of which Nietzsche was critical in the genealogy of morals, rising as part of this ideology itself. At the same time, it's enfolded with the languages of real violence. And the violence always has two directions simultaneously. It's violence directed outwards. Name-eared, those who will be excluded, those who will be rendered nameless, those who don't even rise into the intelligibility of being treated as human beings itself. And the 20th century, late 20th century and 21st century is just replete with these examples itself. And when the examples get too nauseating or their strategic interests, like the Bosnian general that's just shipped off this morning to The Hague for war crimes trials itself. He's free for 15 years, 14 years, but they want to get him to the European Union, so his body better be delivered up quickly. So I'd say, well, these are part of pervasive forms of liberal strategic interests and strategic culture. The age in which we live is, I think, relatively novel, because the great cosmological disputes between theology and secularism have been resolved in favor of a very happy compromise between them. We have God talk all over the place, but we can have murderous technologies and murderous violence at the same time. And in that case, the United States and the United Kingdom, these two old, or Obama's recent speech in London, got up and sort of astounded me when he says, we're still relevant. I thought, well, they must have more cause for worry than I think. They're worrying about India and China and the rising emerging economies of the world itself. But they're claiming relevance on the basis of morality and ethics itself. And I think that's quite a disputable claim in terms of the language of tyranny itself. But having said that, most of the left is broken with Obama on the question of what's happening in Libya, and I don't. I agree with Obama and David Cameron completely, actually, on this specific issue. That I think the language of the streets has spoken of the young in Libya and in Tunisia, they are emblematic of human courage, and have gone the streets at great personal price of real sacrifice, very real possibilities of torture if you're captured in Syria or in Libya and of death, and they're like noble voyagers of the human adventure itself, and they receive help from imperial powers for probably fulfilling their own strategic interests. But there's also the other point of the double inflection of contemporary imperialisms today, is that they have universal moral precepts, and in some instances they begin to honor those precepts. So I honor people that would live up to those precepts. So most of the left, like Zizek, they've been, they're part of the old tyrants club as far as I can see. Because they side with Chavez down in Venezuela, with the president of Iran and all those kind of things. All of them are tyrants in one form or the other. I just think there's a new politics that's being worked out in the Arab Spring, And that new politics for myself is immensely inspiring and truly courageous, needs every bit of support that it can get.
Does that new politics, the politics of the people in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere, does that politics then have a different relationship with liberalism and technology, or liberalism as technology?
Yeah, well, because it supersedes them. It truly does supersede them. Because in the Euro countries, and from Egypt to Tunisia to Libya, just confining to those countries, and Syria, that the problem with the politics is that it has, it's admirable because it's the fulfillment with great human sacrifice of really universal aspirations and individual aspirations to very common things and desirable things. Freedom to go out in the street and dissent without being shot, and a possibility for real employment, that you won't be one of the 45% unemployed in Libya and Tunisia and these societies, and that your state's treasuries won't be looted by your government, that you have a rule of law in your society itself. So all of those precepts, can generally fit within precepts of liberalism itself, but really they don't. They fit within the notions of justice and democracy as basically a social movement. In the end, to resolve those problems, you have to have a real economic revolution. And what happens to countries such as in the Mideast, which have been left outside the feast of prosperity of Europe, Japan, or North America? How do you resolve the problem of the political economy of those societies itself? And so I think the true originality of the politics is that to have real revolutions in Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Bahrain, Syria, is you have to have an economic revolution as well as a political revolution. Who knows what direction that will go in? But I put my trust completely in the young people of these societies because they really are thinking these issues through with great seriousness and immense courage, and have inspired these. I find it really noteworthy that the young people in Spain who took to the streets and were sleeping out, they themselves said that they found their inspiration in the people of Libya. So I thought, well, it's interesting. Previously the colonies have now begun to speak as the moral conscience of the world.